Welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're heading way back, early Cretaceous period, Niger's El-Haz Formation.
A really fascinating spot.
Yeah, and our focus is a dinosaur called Afromimus. Its name, well, it hints at one story, but the science now tells another. We've got the scientific papers here, the descriptions, the analyses, and our mission really is to figure out what this creature was.
And why it's caused a bit of a stir among paleontologists.
Exactly. There's this initial idea and then a pretty major rethink. So we'll unpack that initial classification.
Right, ornithomimosaur.
Right, the ostrich mimic idea. And then look at the evidence that led scientists to reconsider.
It's a great case study in how science progresses. So Afromimus, Africa mimic, that name really sets the stage for the first interpretation.
It does. So where did it actually come from?
It was discovered back in 1997
Okay.
at a place called the Gadafoa locality. That's in the Tenere Desert in Niger.
Right.
And what they found was a partial skeleton, not complete, but, enough to work with.
What kind of bones?
7-tail vertebrae, some bits from the right hind leg, so the tibia, the fibula, a few ankle bones, foot bones, phalanges,
Okay.
and also part of a rib. And interestingly, all these pieces were found pretty close together, within about a 1-meter radius.
Suggests they belong to the same individual, presumably?
That's the strong implication, yeah. They're now cataloged too, MNBH GAD112, at the museum in Niamey.
Got it. And the formal naming came quite a bit later.
Yes, it wasn't until 2017 Paul Sereno published the description.
And he gave it the full name. Afromimus tenerensis?
Exactly.
Right.
Afromimus, Africa mimic, like we said, and tenerensis. Well, that just points to where it was found, the Tenere Desert.
Afromimus, the African mimic from the Tenere. Okay, so let's dig into that mimic part.
Yeah.
Why did Sereno see it as an ornithomimosaur, one of those ostrich-like dinosaurs?
Well, his initial analysis placed it squarely in Ornithomimosauria. He described it as medium-sized for that group.
Medium-sized meaning.
Well, the tibia they found, the main lower leg bone, it was about 40 centimeters long, so roughly 16 inches. Okay. And Sereno compared that to others like Sinornithomimus gallimimus.
The Jurassic Park one?
There's the one, and Shensusaurus. He noted Afromimus's tibia was about the size of a subadult Sinornithomimus, so, a respectable size, but not a giant.
But it wasn't just about size, right? He must have pointed to specific anatomical features.
Oh, absolutely. He focused on several things, particularly in those tail vertebrae.
What about them?
He described, for example, the centrum, that's the main body of the vertebra on the 16th tail vertebra, as being peanut-shaped.
Peanut shape, how does that help?
Well, that specific shape, the contours, he argued it would have helped stabilize the tail, resist bending side to side.
Okay. Like for balance when running fast.
Potentially, yeah. And it's a feature that's also seen in Gallimimus and another unnamed ornithominid from Dinosaur Park Formation.
Interesting. So that peanut shape was a key piece of evidence for him.
Yeah.
Anything else in the tail?
He also highlighted these rimmed depressions on the presicapophyses.
The what now?
The presicaphyses. They're bony bits that stick forward on the vertebra and connect with the one in front. Think of them as interlocking parts.
Okay, got it.
And these depressions, which also show up in Sinornithomimus and some more advanced ornithomimids, they probably help stiffen the tail even more.
So a stiff, stable tail fits that agile ornithomimosaur picture.
That was the thinking. And then he also looked at the foot claws.
What did you see there?
He noted they had a pretty flat bottom surface with a sort of V-shaped platform and also a recessed area where the flexor tendon would attach.
The tendon that pulls the claw.
Exactly. And these claw features, he considered them shared traits with ornithomimosaurs.
Okay. So based on the tail, the claws, the overall size, Sereno built a case. Afromimus fits with the ornithomimosaurs. Maybe an early African member of the group.
That was the initial hypothesis.
But science doesn't always stand still.
Yeah.
And this is where it gets really interesting. A couple of years later, 2019, a different interpretation pops up.
Precisely. Mauricio Ceroni and colleagues published a reassessment. And they didn't just tweak the classification, they proposed something quite different.
Which was?
They suggested Afromimus wasn't an ornithomimosaur at all. Instead, they placed it within Abelisauridea.
Abelisauridea. Now, that's a different group entirely. We're talking things like Carnotaurus, right? The horned predator.
Exactly. A group of theropods known more for predation than mimicking ostriches. Their argument was basically that many of the features Sereno linked to ornithomimosaurs. Well, they're actually also found in Abelisauroids.
Really? So features thought to be characteristic of one group also show up in another, quite different group.
It happens more often than you might think. It's called convergent evolution sometimes, or just shared ancestral traits.
Okay, so what specific abelisaurid clues did Cerrone's team find in Afromimus? What made them challenge the ostrich mimic idea?
They pointed to a whole list of things. Remember those prosopophyses on the vertebrae?
The interlocking bits, yeah.
Well, Cerrone's team noted a rough texture on the sides of those in Afromimus. And that rough texture, it's also seen in abelosaurids like Majungasaurus, Ceratosaurus, Equixinatosaurus.
That was a rough texture before.
Likely attachment points for strong muscles or ligaments, something you might expect in a robust abelosaurid.
Okay, that's one point. Ooh.
They looked at the chevrons too, those V-shaped bones under the tail vertebrae.
Right.
In Afromimus, the bases, the pedicels, were fused in kind of short front to back. And guess what? That's also seen in Ceratosaurus, Majungasaurus, and another one called Masiakasaurus.
So another feature shared with abelosaurids, not necessarily unique to ornithomimosaurs. This really complicates the picture.
It certainly does. And they found more in the hind limb bones.
Like what?
Okay, so on the tibia, the bigger lower leg bone, there's a ridge called the fibular crest. In Afromimus, this crest runs right up to the top end of the bone. It's continuous.
And it's different from ornithomimosaurs.
Generally, yes. Most ornithomimosaurs don't show that continuous crest, but it is typical for abelosauroids.
Huh?
Okay. Also, on the fibula, the smaller leg bone, Afromimus has a noticeable bump, the iliofibular tubercle. It's an attachment point for a muscle,
Right.
and it's prominent, much like you see in Ceratosaurus and various abelosauroids.
Wow. Okay. The leg bone evidence seems to be stacking up for the abelosauroid side. What about the feet and ankles? Sereno thought the claws looked ornithomimosaur-like.
Cerrone and colleagues re-examined those two. They looked at the astragalus, one of the main ankle bones. Part of it, the ascending process, which points upwards.
Yeah.
In Afromimus, it's sort of subrectangular, and crucially, it's fused to the fibula.
Is that common?
Not in ornithomimosaurs, no. But it is found in ceratosaurs, which includes the abelosaurids, and specifically in a family called noasaurids within that group.
So the ankle structure points away from ornithomimosaurs too.
It does. And regarding the claws themselves, while they confirm that recessed flexor attachment Sereno noted, they pointed out that feature isn't actually exclusive to ornithomimosaurs. Some other theropods have it too. Plus, they observed 2 grooves and a bump on the side of the claws.
And that's an abelosaurid thing.
It's seen in some abelosaurids, yeah. Although, interestingly, the upper groove in Afromimus doesn't go all the way to the tip like it does in some of them. A slight difference.
It sounds like a really detailed re-examination. Did they find any really unique, maybe weird features in Afromimus that also linked it to abelosaurids?
Yes, actually. There's this unusual scar on the tibia. It's elliptical, has roughened ridges. And this specific type of scar has also been found on the tibia of Masiakasaurus, Equixinatosaurus, Scorpiovenator, and even Carnotaurus.
Wow, that sounds like a strong link.
It's definitely suggestive. They also confirmed other things, like the fibular crest going all the way to the top of the tibia, which we mentioned.
Right.
And the shaft of the tibia itself is kind of compressed front to back and bowed outwards. Yeah, slightly curved outwards. And that shape, it's similar to noasaurids like Masiakasaurus and Velocisaurus.
Okay.
Plus, there's partial fusion between the tibia and the astragalus, and the ankle joint surface is roughened with a sort of buttress on the inner side. Lots of little details pointing towards abelosaurids, especially noasaurids.
So, taken all together, the evidence Sereno used could be interpreted differently, and then there's all this new evidence strongly suggesting abelosaurid affinities.
That's pretty much the conclusion Cerrone and his team came to. The weight of evidence shifted significantly.
Which brings us to the number crunching part, the phylogenetic analyses. How do those fit in?
Right. These are the computer analyses that try to build the family tree based on shared features. And interestingly, even before Cerrone's 2019 paper, some earlier, broader analyses had hinted Afromimus might not fit well with ornithomimosaurs.
Oh, really? Like which ones?
Studies by Carano and colleagues, and Chouanière and colleagues, both back in 2012, their results tentatively placed Afromimus within Ceratosauria, the bigger group containing abelosaurids, maybe near Masiakasaurus or Majungasaurus.
And what happened if they forced it into the ornithomimosaur group in those analyses?
It basically made the resulting family tree less likely, less parsimonious in evolutionary terms. It required more evolutionary steps, suggesting it wasn't the best fit.
So the seeds of doubt were already there in the data.
You could say that, yeah. And then another analysis in 2016 by Brisson-Egli and colleagues focused specifically on ceratosaurs.
And where did Afromimus land in that one?
It fell within Nuasauridae, that family inside Abelisauridea. Features like the flattened lower end of the tibia and that fused ankle bone process supported this placement.
So where did Ceroni's team officially place it in 2019?
They formally referred Afromimus to Abelisauridea and said it was likely within Noasauridae.
But they kept it as its own genus, Afromimus, not lumped into Mesiacosaurus or something.
Correct. They argued it had its own unique features, like a particularly large process on the chevron bone, and the specific way the tibial crest covered part of the fibula, so distinct enough to be its own thing, but definitely an abelisaurid.
But the story doesn't quite end there, does it? Science keeps moving.
It really does. Just this year, 2024, a study by Hendricks and colleagues proposed yet another placement.
Ooh, what now?
They suggested putting Afromimus into a whole new group they called Berthosauridae. Still an abelisauroid, mind you, but positioned outside of Noasauridae, maybe as a sister group to other abelisauroids.
Wow, so definitely an abelisaurid seems likely now, but precisely where it fits within that group is still being debated.
Exactly. It really highlights how ongoing research refines these relationships. It's not always a simple A or B answer.
It's a fantastic example of the scientific process in action. Okay, let's shift gears slightly. What was the world Afromimus lived in actually like? The El-Haz Formation? What else was around?
Right, the paleoecology. We're talking early Cretaceous nature. And the Gatofoa locality where Afromimus was found has yielded a really rich fauna.
Lots of other dinosaurs.
Oh, yes. Other theropods, for sure. You had big predators like Suchomimus or maybe Cristatosaurus. There's some debate there.
Spinosaurids, right?
Yeah, fish eaters probably. And also cryptops and the Carcharodontosauridae Ocarcharia. So some serious predators around.
Definitely. What about plant eaters?
Plenty of those, too. The famous sauropod Nigersaurus with its vacuum cleaner mouth.
Ah,
And several ornithopods, the big sail-backed Oranosaurus, the hefty Lurdosaurus, and the smaller Elberhazosaurus. So Afromimus was sharing its environment with quite a crowd.
sounds like a busy place. Any non-dinosaur neighbors?
Absolutely. Lots of crocodilians. The giant Sarcosuchus, nicknamed Supercroc,
Ooh.
alongside others like Stalochrysuchus, Araripasuchus, and the sort of pug-nosed Anatosuchus, plus turtles and loads of fish. Big coelacanths, Mawsonia, lungfish, Ceratodus, ray-finned fish, Lepidodes, Pleiades. It was likely a riverine or deltaic environment.
A very diverse ecosystem. But no other fossils were found right with the Afromimus bones.
No, not in direct association, just the Afromimus skeleton itself in that one spot.
Okay, now let's circle back to that initial ornithomimosaur idea for a second. Serino had this broader hypothesis, right, about early ornithomimosaurs in the southern continents.
Yes, he did. He suggested that Afromimus, found in Africa, and another dinosaur called Unwebosaurus, found in South Africa, might represent an early radiation of ornithomimosaurs across Gondwana, the southern supercontinent, before it fully broke apart.
Sort of seeding the southern hemisphere with these ostrich mimics early on.
That was the potential implication.
But now,
Ah,
with Afromimus reclassified as an abelisauroid, how does that affect his hypothesis?
well, it significantly weakens it, doesn't it? If Afromimus isn't an ornithomimosaur, that removes a key piece of evidence for that southern group.
And what about Inquebosaurus? Is its identity certain?
That's the other issue. The classification of Inquebosaurus itself is also debated. Some analyses question if it's truly an ornithomimosaur either.
Ah. So both pillars of that southern ornithomimosaur hypothesis are looking a bit shaky now.
Pretty much. The evidence for early ornithomimosaurs being widespread in Gondwana is much less certain now than it seemed back in 2017. It shows how reclassifying just one fossil can ripple outwards and affect these bigger biogeographic stories.
It really does. So let's try and sum up. What's the key takeaway on Afromimus?
I think the bottom line is that Afromimus, initially dubbed the Africa mimic because it looked like an ostrich dino, is now much more likely an abelisauroid theropod.
So related more closely to things like Carnotaurus and Majungasaurus.
Exactly. Probably within or very close to the Noasaurid family or maybe this new Berthosauridae group. The exact spot is still debated, but the abelisaurid connection looks strong. It's a great example of how science refines itself.
And it was all down to reinterpreting those anatomical details, the vertebrae, the leg bones, the ankle, the claws. Features initially thought to point one way.
Turned out to be more consistent with a completely different group when examined more closely and compared more broadly. Those subtle details are everything in paleontology.
It highlights the meticulous work involved. So wrapping up this deep dive on Afromimus, It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Definitely.
How does changing the identity of just one partial skeleton like this ripple through our understanding of dinosaur evolution, especially in Africa?
It forces us to redraw parts of the family tree, reconsider how these groups spread across the globe.
It makes you wonder what other dinosaur classifications that seem solid right now might be overturned by the next discovery or the next detailed analysis.
It's a constant process of discovery and revision. That's what makes it exciting.
Indeed. A reminder that the story of life on Earth is always being rewritten.